idea actually came to me back during the pandemic. You know, we were all working from home, and you know, obviously it's a different perspective. And at that point, I thought, I wonder if, you know, staff and, you know, interpretive staff and volunteers might want to have a little bit of just some, you know, background knowledge, general biology, natural history, and as things, you know, pertain to our mission here at the museum. But, you know, a lot of this is stuff that I actually had, that I teach the students at Winthrop, and just kind of tailor it to this group. And so I feel like anybody who's, you know, working in a natural history museum, you know, should have some just basic, you know, background knowledge about a few things and what science and biology are actually about. So that's what this one is actually geared to. And so if I say anything wrong, Morgan, you'll have to correct me, because I'm just so excited to have another biologist on staff now. So I have to be on my toes. But
oh, now you can't squeak it.
that's right. I can't just say anything I want to say, you know. But Elements of Living Systems, that's actually the name of the course that I teach. It's a general biology course for non-science majors. So, you know, these are students who are having no intentions or desire to go into science or biology. They're trying to jump a hurdle. And so I try to get them, you know, I understand that when I'm teaching them, but I also want them to pick up a little something and say, you know, maybe science maybe a little bit cool after all. So that's kind of what this is about. So, you know, if you ask someone, what is biology? You know, the first thing that might come to mind is that course I really didn't want to have to deal with in school. That's that course I really didn't do that well in school. But I've always loved it since I was a kid. I've always loved nature and science, and I always like to tell this story of, I remember way back as a young person, as a child, and I guess one of the first things that really intrigued me were reptiles, you know. And I remember very distinctly the day my father, I was playing out in the yard, and he came, said, "Son, let's talk." When we went over to the swing under the tree, and we, you know, swinging. He said, "Well," he said, "I'd like to talk to you about the birds and the bees." And in my complete, you know, oblivious fashion, I said, "Nah, I'd rather talk about snakes and alligators."
Same difference.
We were on two different wavelengths there. So, but you know, biology. A lot of people say, "Well, it's the study of life." Well, that begs the question: what is life? And if you start thinking about it, that's really something that's hard to define. And then when you think about it some more, you think, you know what, I could probably define that on several different levels, several different disciplines. You know, some will say it's not just about a scientific explanation. A lot of people would infer there's a spiritual definition, an emotional definition, metaphysical as well as physical. So there's lots of different ways you can go with this. Philosophy and biology might try to answer this question, as would religion, you know. So it's probably better to kind of focus and say, not what is life, but living things or living systems, and the fact that they display certain characteristics or traits. That's what we're after here. And so what you have to remember is that all living, and the biologists are fond of the term organism. It's just another thing that means living thing or living being. They are all adapted to survive and to reproduce. And so they have these characteristics we're going to talk about. They're organized in certain ways, but no matter what they are, every single species has adaptations to survive and to reproduce. And one of the things I always like to talk about, especially to non-science majors, is, you know, you're going to come across something in your daily life, probably an insect or maybe a snake or something that you're going to find unsavory. And you're going to ask that question that just, I can't stand. And that question is, what good is it? What good is that? You know, what good are mosquitoes? You know, what good are snakes? And I learned a long time ago that that's not the right question. The right question is not what good are they, but how good are they? how good are they at surviving and reproducing? Because if they manage to do that, if they manage to get their genes into the next generation, then they're successful. To ask the question, what good are they, is very arrogant on our part. Very arrogant. Okay, so, you know, it really helps to think of humans, you know, in a different way, and not ask that question, what good are they, but how good are they? So, there's your critter there, Dorothy. So, yeah, so every living thing, every living system has characteristics. So when we say defining life, what we really mean is we were looking at characteristics that living things display. Now, you already saw that image up there earlier, and you basically said, what is that? And then you asked me, is it the front or the back? You know? So, does anybody have any idea what that is?
Nope. John does, of course.
What is it, John?
That's the tardigrade.
That's a tardigrade. And first of all, we should say that's not life size, right?
No.
What is a tardigrade, John?
It is one of those little tiny microbial organisms. That's what I was looking for. And they survive everything.
Yeah, some of them, and you know, you could probably see one with the naked eye, but it's going to look like just like a little dot, basically. You really need some kind of magnification to see them. The common name for these guys is water bears. Water bears. But they're a little, and like John said, they can survive. When you talk about survival, those guys can survive anything. We talk about, you know, cockroaches surviving the apocalypse. When the cockroaches are long gone and extinct, the water bears will still be laughing at them because they can undergo desiccation, they can dry up, they can freeze. It has been they survived in outer space, and they've done experiments with that. Survived in outer space. They undergo some kind of animation. They've actually been used for studies to see how, you know, someone could undergo this suspended animation and then reanimate. So they're just incredible. They can live in the water. They've lived in polar regions. They live in moss. And just fascinating little creatures that have this incredible distribution. But they have every one of these characteristics. We'll talk about each of these. Organization, metabolism, homeostasis, growth, movement, adaptation, reproduction. Living things display these traits or characteristics. And you might look up different versions of this. You're going to get different terms here. But this is the meat of it here, what it is to be a living system. So the first one is organization. All right. All living systems display incredible organization. What you're looking at here, it's a model, obviously, but this is how biologists depict just a single membrane of a cell. Not just a single cell, just the membrane that surrounds it. It has all of these complex structures and molecules. They have proteins and glycoproteins and lipids and phospholipids and all these incredible structures in there on a molecular level. And these things have to maintain integrity, and they have to stay in a certain order. And if you want to maintain order, it requires energy. Lots and lots of energy. If you don't believe it, just stop maintaining order altogether. Just in your dwelling place, in a room, in a house, stop maintaining order and see how long it takes it to go to entropy or disorder. Okay? You got to put energy into that system to keep it up and running. Same with your body, same with every cell in your body. Organization, highly, highly organized, even on the smallest levels. Metabolism, that's a word that's somewhat familiar, but generally speaking, that sums up all the chemical processes required for life. Now, obviously, here I'm depicting one organism eating another, a bear, you know, going after the fish. But it's not just about acquiring nutrients, it's also about processing those nutrients, getting energy from them, and then eliminating the waste products, which is also crucial because nothing is 100% efficient in living systems. Okay? Anything that requires energy is not going to be a 100% efficient process. There's going to be energy that gets left over, dissipated as heat, and there's going to be waste products. And getting rid of those waste products is not just a matter of convenience. A lot of times it's a matter of life or death because waste products can be toxic if organisms don't get them out of their system. You know, for instance, just think about our own excretory systems. You know, we have to filter our blood through our kidneys and maintain water and salt balance, and then we excrete, we excrete urine. But if our bodies didn't do that, eventually the nitrogen toxins would build up to lethal levels, and it would be, could kill you. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about, homeostasis. It's a word that's probably not familiar to a lot of people, but it just basically means maintaining internal conditions, but within very specific, narrow limits. All right? When you go to the doctor's office, no matter what your doctor visit is for, they're going to check your homeostasis before the doctor comes in. What are they going to do? They're going to check your temperature. They're going to check your blood pressure. Okay? They might check your heartbeat or whatever. Why are they doing that? Why are they? I mean, you're going because you got an ingrown toenail. Why are they looking at and checking your blood pressure and your temperature and all these other things?
The baseline of why you're healthy or not.
That's right. They want to check, make sure that homeostasis is working for you. Narrow limits. What do I mean by that? If they check your temperature and it's 102 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not maintaining homeostasis, is it? They want it to be around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what we mean by narrow limits. If it's much higher than that, that's indicative of a problem. If it's much lower than that, it's indicative of a problem. If your blood pressure doesn't have that systolic and diastolic numbers aren't on around an average of 120 over 80, a little more variation there. But if the numbers are much higher, then they're gonna start saying we got some problems here. We got some problems here. And living systems have to maintain those narrow limits. Water and salt balance. That's one that a lot of people don't think about. But let me give you a good example of that. Okay? We've all heard that you should drink X amount of water every day, right? How much water generally they tell you to drink on a daily basis?
8 glasses.
Okay, and when they say glass, what's the approximate volume of that glass? 8 ounces?
Yeah.
So you should drink 8 times 8 ounces on average of water a day. So what is that? 8 times 8, 64 ounces.
64 ounces.
Roughly equivalent to a 2-liter bottle. All right, so that means if I have that 2-liter bottle and I fill it with water, I should, on average, drink that every day to maintain water and salt balance. Okay, but Sarah's a busy person, and she don't have time to be, thinking about that all day long. So Sarah decides she's going to get her 2-liter bottle of water, and you're going to drink it all right now, just all at once. How do you think your homeostatic mechanism is going to respond to that?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Not going to allow it, is it? No. Water and salt balance are important. So if you can keep it down, that might be the first thing. You might not be able to keep that much water in your stomach. But even if you can, I can assure you the next hour or two, you're not going to get much done because homeostasis is kicking in and that water's getting kicked out, right? So that's an important thing. Now, another thing we don't think about, why do I have a lizard up here on the screen for homeostasis? The heat mechanism. We want our body to be around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Do I have to worry about maintaining my body temperature? Do I have to consciously try to maintain that? No, I'm a mammal. I'm an endotherm. Some people call a warm-blooded organism, which means my metabolism is high enough that I'm constantly giving off a certain amount of body heat. But again, that takes a lot of energy. Birds are the same way. They're endotherms. In fact, there's a saying that people use that's completely out of place and wrong. If I were to say, Allison eats like a bird, what does that mean to you?
She doesn't eat much.
She doesn't eat much, right? But if I, as a biologist, say Allison eats like a bird, that should be offensive to her.
Yeah,
Because
watch my hummingbirds.
Right.
And the other birds
that,
that my feet
that
rest.
takes a lot. I mean, yeah, they might peck here and there, but over the course of the day, they are consuming an incredible amount of food to maintain that high metabolism and giving off that body heat. What you should say, to be actually be nicer about it, but it wouldn't sound nice to say, Alice eats like a crocodile. You're thinking, wow, that's not nice. Well, crocodile or an alligator, they may gulp something down, swallow something down their own size, and they may not eat again for a month. You know, they don't. Reptiles have a different homeostatic mechanism. They thermoregulate or control their body temperature behaviorally. They do have to think about it, in essence. If they get too cold, they're going to get out in the sun to try to raise that body temperature. More importantly, if they start to overheat, and that can be way more deadly for a reptile than getting too cold, they better get out of that sun, they better find some shade, they better get in the water, but it's even more than that. We've learned that the blood vessels close to their skin, if this guy wants to warm up, not only is he going to be out in the sun, but the blood vessels across his back are going to dilate, which means they're going to soak in more heat. The blood vessels on the belly are going to constrict, so they're not losing heat to the surface. Okay? So they have this whole group of mechanisms in place to help them maintain that body temperature, which is part of the homeostasis. Maintaining narrow limits, that's what's important. Movement. This is a characteristic of living systems. And when we think about movement, you usually just think about animals, makes sense. But single-celled organisms move. You've probably seen them under a microscope. Plants, these are plant cells. People think plants don't move. On a cellular level, they do. That is called cytoplasmic streaming. That's a fun word, isn't it? With those organelles and stuff circulating through there to help distribute heat. But movement, that's a characteristic of living systems. Growth. Okay? There's only two ways growth can occur in any living thing. You can increase the number of cells, and you can increase the size of the cells. And that's what cells do. They grow, and after a certain point, they divide. The process they call mitosis, you may have learned about in school some time ago. So, and that they go through this cell cycle of growth and division, growth and division. So that happens on a cellular level. That's what growth occurs. Now, growth is different in different organisms. Okay? Plants generally tend to grow throughout their entire life in some way. A lot of animals tend to reach a certain point in their life where the growth, if it doesn't stop completely, at least it slows down considerably. Okay? But that's not, even there are some animals. A lot of the reptiles, a lot of the fish, they'll continue to grow throughout most of their life, especially if they've got space to do it in. But no matter what they are or where they're doing it, it's all about increasing the size or the number of their cells. Now this is a fun one too, because this is something we talk about a lot at the museum. But what you got to remember is adaptation kind of has dual meaning, because adaptation, it can be a process, and an adaptation can be a specific trait of something that's alive, right? So we talk about this adaptation for this animal, or we talk about the process of adaptation, how this animal spends its life. So, classic example, the term adaptation as a process simply means becoming better suited to the environment. Okay? And we all know that the environment changes, and so organisms that change with it are more likely to survive and therefore more likely to reproduce. Classic example, the polar bear. And I know we've got the polar bear in the Natural Center, and years and years and years ago we had two other polar bears on exhibit here that were in there. And we used to love to talk to visitors about the polar bear as a classic example of adaptation. All right. So I'm going to call on a couple of my staff members here, because we've got the polar bear in the Naturalist Center. What are some of the things we tell our visitors, our students, when they come in the Naturalist Center or the museum about polar bears? Adaptations for them. I'll go ahead and call on our newbie here. What's one good adaptation of a polar bear, Morgan?
I would say, how about their feet?
Okay, what about
They got big, wide, furry feet, help them not break through ice.
the big, wide, furry feet, or help them travel along on the ice a little more effectively? And you know, feet get cold, right? If you ever walk outside sometime in the ice or the snow barefooted, and you know that the heat gets drawn away from that pretty quickly. So having that further is definitely going to help that. What's another adaptation, John, of a polar bear?
I talk about the claws sometimes.
What are you telling
I
people?
compare them to the brown bear.
All right.
I talk about the brown bear needing to dig around and hook leaves and branches and berries and things, and how the polar bear claws don't need to do all that.
That's right. Yeah, the grizzly bear claws or brown bear claws are kind of long, thin, and sharp, whereas the polar bear claws are actually a little shorter, but they're wide and they're still sharp, but they're more robust. And that helps them, you know, again, a little bit with the traction in the ice, but also come in handy when they're hunting. Remember, these guys, I mean, how many times have you seen polar bears munching on plants? Okay, typically in their environment, there aren't any. Now, they're like any other bear, probably. In the right environment, they might forage a little bit. They might have an omnivorous diet. In fact, you know, there's been places in Canada where the polar bears have actually come down and they'll raid trash cans and trash dumps and things like that. But in their native natural habitat, they have to be carnivores because there's really not much else around for them to deal with. So seals are the primary prey, but probably anything else that's small enough to catch and eat would be considered a good prey for polar bears. So what about, you know, all of this here?
What about the color?
What about
Why is it different from, say, a brown bear, a black bear, a grizzly bear? Is it because of the snow? Is it? But I don't really know what advantage that would be unless you're lying on the edge waiting for a seal.
it? And sometimes they do that.
Is it like camouflage? And isn't
Yeah.
there, is there something about their fur being like hollow almost, or?
It is. If you look at polar bear, a single strand, just to think of a single strand of hair, you know, it's going to have a hollow shaft, every single hair, an air space. Air is one of the best insulators that there is, right? And so that helps to insulate them, all right? Now, there used to be this notion that polar bears would actually capture UV energy from the sun and channel it down this shaft of hair like a fiber optic cable and warm their skin with it. That has been experimentally tested, and the hypothesis has been disproven, basically. That's not what's going on there. However, it does act as a great heating mechanism. So that's an adaptation. And speaking of which, most people are surprised to find out, if you were to shave a polar bear, which I don't recommend, what color would the skin underneath be?
Black.
Black.
Mm.
The pigment melt, and you can see it. You can see it where it's thin right there on his face. But again, if you removed all that fur, he really would look bizarre. He'd be solid black. The pigment melanin. How is that an adaptation?
It helps in it, it absorbs the heat.
Yeah, the darker the surface, the more heat that is absorbed. You know that. You go out in the summertime, you're wearing a dark shirt, you're going to be hotter than
And
somebody
why
who's wearing.
isn't the fur dark?
Well, that fur. That's a very good question, Dorothy. That's a very good question. So what is the whole thing with white anyway? When we perceive, you're smiling, you know the answer.
I was just laughing at you.
She's laughing at me. What's that about?
I know you were just fumbling for your words.
You're digging that hole deeper. It's all right. I love to have fun, and I love to poke fun at myself. So, but that's a good question, Dorothy. Why does this thing look? Is it really white? What is white? Now we're going down a rabbit hole. All right.
Non-color.
It's a non-color, right? It's a lack of
Lack
color.
of color.
If you think about color being in like the colors of the rainbow, prism, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Okay, those are the colors in there. Where's the white? Well, every color in that spectrum is coming out of those fluorescent lights, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But when they're all mixed together, visible light looks white to us. Same thing's going on here. All of those wavelengths are being reflected equally to our eyes to make this organism appear white to us. Okay? So that, along with the insulative value of the fur, is an adaptation for this guy to have that black skin, but that's also going to help insulate it by holding it in as well. Speaking of that face, which I showed you earlier, that face is not as long compared to the grizzly bear, the brown bear in the natural center. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. How would that be an adaptation? Having a shorter snout. Think about where it lives. And it's cold. And having a shorter, sorry, I got that backwards, didn't I? The snout on a polar bear has a lot of sinus passage in there, lots of surface area. That's the term I'm looking for. So when it breathes in, okay, it actually has time for that air to warm up before it gets to the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm thinking about being small here is not the snout, but look at the ears.
The ears.
They're very tiny compared to a larger bear's ears. That's because there's lots of blood vessels in the ears, lots of capillaries, and they give off heat. So by having smaller ears, it's be able to retain more body heat. So this guy is just an incredible suite of adaptations that's allowed it to survive for as long as it has. Now, the environment's changing. You know, temperatures are on average getting warmer, and their habitats are disappearing. So, you know, we've talked about this before too in the Natural Center. I have some, you know, when that happens, when your environment changes, you've only got 3 options. You know, adapt, migrate, or you go extinct. That's the only thing organisms can do in the face of environmental change. That's the history of life on Earth.
Do you think that they could change their color? They change their fur? Could they adapt to?
Well, that's something we'd have to see in successive generations. Now,
Right.
individuals can't make that change, but as
No.
a species over time, you know, those things can happen. And we're going to talk about that in this series too. You know, what is evolution, and more importantly, what is not?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of what's out there about evolution is not right. I mean, people are holding on to some old notions about it, but I don't want to have any spoilers on that yet. We're going to talk about that too in here. Reproduction. That's simply production of new individuals. And there's different ways of doing that in terms of parthenogenesis, which means single-celled organisms, they just divide and make clones of themselves and grow exponentially. Bacteria and things like that. Some organisms exchange genes with one another. We call that sexual reproduction. So you have what would be considered a male and what would be considered a female. But even on some levels, there are some organisms that reproduce what we call asexually. There are those that don't have to have fertilized eggs. There are some reptiles, yet offspring from unfertilized eggs. Okay. There are, of course, plants, and you know, some of them produce seeds. Some of them don't have seeds, like ferns, they produce spores. So there's different ways of getting new individuals into the population, but that is the primary means of reproduction there. So those are all of the characteristics of living systems. Okay? Living systems display all of those traits. But also living systems have to be organized in a certain way. There's different levels of organization in them. What do I mean by that? Well, everything, whether it's alive or not in the universe, okay, is composed of what we would call atoms. Now, if you want to get deep into physics, you can actually say, well, atoms aren't the smallest thing in the universe. You know, there's all these different particles that make up atoms. And nowadays, there's all kinds of things that people in physics are looking at that go even smaller. But I like to say, for the purposes of living systems, you know, we start with atoms. Okay? Everything is composed of atoms. Now, what most people are surprised to find is that atoms are constantly in motion. Okay? Now, I've already said that was a characteristic of living things, but I didn't say it was exclusive to living things. So that wall is made up of a lot of different atoms. I don't see any movement going on. But if I were able to look down at the atomic level, I would see them atoms vibrating at a certain frequency. That's what they do, whether they're alive or not. How many people have seen this before, or something that looks like that? Okay? In school, in the science class usually, especially chemistry or whatever, what's this called? Periodic table of the elements. In other words, this is all atoms, all the matter that we know about in the universe categorized in certain ways. Now, I don't know how much time you spend around periodic tables other than them hanging on the wall in your classroom. But you ever, think to take a look at it and like, well, what do these things mean? Well, you got numbers and you got letters. All right. There seems to be some order here. There's one over there, there's two, and then 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I can count. And then I get up to 92, and then beyond 92, there's some differences. Okay? What is significant about the first 92 elements on this table? Anybody know? There's a significance to the first 92. They are naturally occurring in the universe. Everything above that has been altered somewhat and is a result of human activity. Uranium is number 92. It's the heaviest of the naturally occurring elements. But humans have taken uranium and modified it to get Neptunium and plutonium. Those are two of the radioactive elements you probably. But they wouldn't exist had humans not interfered somehow. And so that's what all of these above 92 are.
What about number 61? That's white, the same kind of 61 down at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. What does that mean?
I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't know what all those are.
Yeah.
Now,
But I mean, I don't know what it is.
that might be. No, it's not palladium.
I'm just wondering why it was white and the others.
Yeah, I honestly don't know why they've done those.
I certainly don't.
No, but that's a good question because you do notice the differences here. But here, you might not be able to see that. That's an H, right?
I know that one.
What is it?
Hydrogen.
Okay, so hydrogen. What about this one?
Helium.
Helium, okay. So we know some of them, and it makes, okay, so hydrogen, helium. Here's number 26, Fe. What is that? Iron. That's iron. Fe is iron?
Isn't it?
Well, it doesn't start with IR. It's got Fe.
It's still iron.
Is there an IR up there?
There
should be.
If there is an IR, it's probably something.
Iridium.
Iridium.
It's up there. But that's iridium. So why is iron Fe? Why is gold Ag?
Argon.
Why is lead PB?
I think don't they come from the Latin?
Some of them are Latin,
Origins?
some of them are Greek. Fe, ferrous. Okay. So yeah, some of these are Latin and Greek, but some of them are English. That's a good point. Now, I always said, wouldn't it be a nightmare to have to memorize the periodic table of the elements? But if you were going to memorize it, wouldn't it be good to put it to a song?
There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, and iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium, lutetium, vanadium, and lanthanum, and osmium, and astatine, and radium, and gold, protactinium, and indium, and gallium, and iodine, and thorium, and thulium, and thallium. There's yttrium, ytterbium, actinium, rubidium, and boron, gadolinium, niobium, iridium, and strontium, and silicon, and silver, and samarium, and bismuth, bromine, lithium, beryllium, and barium. There's holmium and helium and hafnium and erbium and phosphorus and francium and fluorine and terbium and manganese and mercurium, molybdenum, magnesium, dysprosium and scandium and cerium and cesium and lead, praseodymium and platinum, plutonium, palladium, promethium, potassium, polonium and tantalum, technetium, titanium, tellurium and cadmium and calcium and chromium and curium. There's sulfur, californium, and fermium, berkelium, and also mendelevium, einsteinium, nobelium, and argon, krypton, neon, radon, xenon, zinc, and rhodium, and chlorine, carbon, cobalt, copper, tungsten, tin, and sodium. These are the only ones of which the news has come to Harvard. And there may be many others, but they haven't been discovered.
So what I wanted to make a point of that is that in terms of living systems, these atoms are among the most important. A lot of those atoms are a part of living systems and in trace amounts, but carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are probably the most important. That's because the major macromolecules that living things require, carbohydrates, lipids or fats, proteins, and the nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, all of them have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them. And you can't have those things without it. So these are probably the most important to living systems. So, in terms of levels, the level up from an atom is a molecule. All right? It can be as simple as two atoms joined together. Like, that's what oxygen is. The oxygen we breathe is molecular oxygen, or O2. That's two single oxygen atoms that are fused together by a bond. In the natural world, oxygen is most stable as a molecule. You can have atomic oxygen in the atmosphere, just single atoms. You can also put some energy in the system and fuse O2 with another oxygen atom and make O3. What is that? Ozone. Ozone, which is very important up there as a UV shield. Down here, not so much. It's a pollutant. You don't want to breathe that. Ozone, you've all experienced ozone if you've been anywhere near an electrical fire or when the outlet shorts out. That acrid smell that you get, that's ozone that formed right there from that electricity fusing oxygen together to make the ozone. Okay. So a molecule can be as simple as two atoms stuck together, or it can be as complex as hundreds or thousands of atoms stuck together, such as what you see in a DNA molecule. This is a small section of a DNA molecule. Look at all those atoms there. Okay. So very, very complex these molecules can be. The next jump, the next level, is a single step, but it's a very important step. Because when you go from the level of molecules to cells, you have gone from the realm of the non-living to the living. Cells are the smallest unit that can be considered alive. Molecules are not alive. Cells are alive. And cells are made up of many molecules. Like I said, proteins, carbs, lipids, nucleic acids, things like that. But it's a big step, even though it's a single step, from molecule to cell, because you've crossed into the world of the living at that point. Cells come together to form what we call tissues. So you have fat cells that make what we call adipose tissue. You have different kinds of cells form what we call epithelial tissue. And all of those tissues combined, tissues form what we call organs. So that's the next level up. Tissues form organs. So the epithelial, adipose, and other tissues make up an organ we call skin. Did you realize that? Your skin is considered an organ? You know, it used to be the way you'd make a bet in the bar and win off somebody is ask them a trivia question, what's the largest organ of the human body? They'd say the liver. Nope, correct answer is the skin. Skin is the largest organ of the human body. Organs form the next level, what we call organ systems. So that skin is part of your integumentary system. The brain is an organ that's a part of the nervous system, just as a bone is an organ that's a part of the skeletal system. collectively, organ systems come together to form what we would call an organism. So all of these systems, lymphatic, respiratory, your digestive, all those come together to form the organism. Now what's kind of interesting is most of these systems, even though they're part of a single organism, most of these systems, their primary function is to keep one major organ alive. That organ being what? The brain.
Brain.
Okay. So, in other words, the digestive system. Yes, it's breaking down nutrients to the rest of the body, but it's really trying to feed this organ up here. That respiratory system, bringing in oxygen. Yes, other organs need that oxygen, but you want to keep if the brain doesn't get oxygen for a very small period of time, that homeostasis, major troubles ensue, right? And so, other systems have different values, but I often tell people that virtually all of these systems function to keep the brain alive except for one.
Reproductive?
The reproductive system. And what does it do? It makes more brains. Right? The way I look at that anyway. Organisms can come together to form the next level we call a population. And so, population is unique in that it includes all of the organisms that are of the same species in a given area at a given time. Okay? In order to be considered a population, you have to be the same species. Part of the reason for that is that the population being the same species means that they can interbreed and cause the population to grow. All right. So all living things, same species, are considered a population, but all the living things of different species in the same area make up what we call the biological community. So there's different interactions there. And when we talk about ecology in here, we'll talk about these different interactions with populations, communities, and then you throw in the next level, the ecosystem. So the biological community is all of the living things in an area. But if you fold in the things in the environment that are not alive, they're part of the ecosystem. A lot of people use the terms community and ecosystem interchangeably. And really, they're different, they're distinct. Because you don't have the level of the ecosystem until you're bringing in the non-living things. The light, the water, the air, whatever. Large-scale ecosystems are what we call biomes. And there's going to be relatively few of those on Earth. So the thing that characterizes a biome is that a lot of area and usually temperature and precipitation are going to kind of be a characteristic of what helps define that, as well as the major plant communities that live in them. And then collectively, all the living systems on the Earth comprise what we would call the biosphere. The biosphere. Try as we might, look as we will, so far we haven't found living systems outside of our own planet. That doesn't mean they're not out there. It just means we haven't found them yet. But even if we do, there's probably going to be relatively little interaction between our biosphere and any other. Although there are those that suggest that life wouldn't have started on this planet had it not been brought in through extraterrestrial means. But that's a different way of looking at things, in my opinion. Put this up here for my own sake, because I'm really more animal-centric than I am plant-centric. But plants have tissues and organs and all that as well. So the leaf is an organ for a plant. And it's made up of different tissue. Just like you have an epithelial tissue in your skin, plants have tissues that are made of cells, their own kinds of cells. And also, there are some organisms that can exist as an organism, but also just as a single cell. We call them single cell organisms for that reason, right? So the things you looked at under a microscope in high school or college, amoeba, paramecium, things like that, they're a single cell, but they are still alive and occupy these different levels. The last thing I want to do, I've talked about levels of organization. So let's start with a single organism and see how it fits into all of the levels. Okay? So an elephant, right? That's an easy enough one to think about. That elephant has an innumerable amount of atoms, right? Any number of atoms make up that organism. The atoms in that elephant may be a part of any kind of molecule. In this case, that's a hemoglobin molecule, right? So those atoms might form hemoglobin, and if they do, they're going to reside on the surface of a cell, specifically one of the red blood cells. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and other things form a tissue that we call blood. And that blood is going to be pumped through different organs, such as the heart, and be a part of an organ system known as the cardiovascular system. And that cardiovascular system, along with the digestive system and all the others, comprise the level of the organism. That organism is more than likely part of a population, meaning it's going to be living with other elephants of its own same species, its own kind, in the same area at the same time. And more than likely that population is actually going to be part of a larger biological community that includes other living things, plants and trees and other animals. And that biological community is actually part of a larger ecosystem that includes non-living components of soil and air and water and what have you. And that ecosystem might be part of a larger, what we would call biome, say a savanna, which is a type of grassland interspersed with various kinds of trees. That biome savanna or grassland savanna is going to be one of many that comprise the Earth's biosphere. So this is a summary of what we've talked about, all of the levels of organization and the different characteristics of living things. So no matter what you talk about in here to groups or visitors or whatever in the Natural Center or any exhibits we're looking at, all of these things are pertinent. You know, every living thing has those levels of organization associated. Every living thing has those characteristics associated with it. So while I cannot define life, I can observe the characteristics of living systems. All right? Any questions, comments, observations, or conclusions?